For more on the Democrats' response to white supremacy, Antjuan Seawright joins us from Washington. He's a CBSN political contributor and a Democratic strategist. We just heard Senator Booker there speaking in Charleston. Of course, that church has a lot of meaning, but a little bit more about what he said. What did you hear in his speech?
Well, several things. There was a big difference between Senator Booker's remarks and President Trump's remarks that we heard in between. I think what Senator Booker was trying to say, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, is that we have to bring this country together. We have to do something about this epidemic called gun violence, but also we cannot push the ignore button. Or the chill button on the reality that white supremacists has been on the rise since Donald Trump has taken office. Hate crimes have been on the rise since Donald Trump has taken office, and his rhetoric and his tone has been a major factor, we all think, in contributing to some of these things that we just cannot ignore. And if we do not do something, then that something is going to cost us everything in the future.
How are other 2020 candidates addressing the issue of white supremacy? And I ask that question because it had been talked about, but since these shootings, it's really come to the forefront, and we expect to hear from several of the candidates today. So again, let me re-ask that question. How are the other 2020 candidates going to address this?
What I think all of them realize is that leopards will not change their spots and zebras will not change their stripes. The fact of the matter is Donald Trump started and ended his 2016 campaign this way, and whoever emerges from the group as our nominee will have to face the same type of rhetoric, the same type of behavior and posture going into next year's election. So I think they all agree on that point. I think all of them also agree that we have to call these things out and we just cannot ignore them because in my mind, and I think this is true for a lot of people, silence means consent. And the fact of the matter is we're starting to see this country go full steam backwards. Some of the things that I learned about and I heard about as the grandson of sharecroppers in South Carolina are some of the same things we're starting to see play out right here today in 2019. I think all of them have come to grips, but I also think all of them have a laser focus on addressing some of the policies that stem as a result of some of the posture or the rhetoric that comes from leaders in the Republican Party led by Donald Trump. And so no matter the differences they may have and how they want to approach being our Democratic nominee, I think all those things they have in common they believe to be true.
Now, in 2016, we heard then candidate Trump giving these speeches using words like invasion. The shootings happened over the weekend. He condemns racism, bigotry, and white supremacy after those shootings. How are the Democratic candidates responding to his most recent remarks?
Well, I think they're going to ignore them because I believe this as a young Southern boy is I'd rather see a sermon than hear one any day of the week. And we all know the patterns of behavior by Donald Trump. He will say one thing and do another. He gave a speech read from a teleprompter speaking to this idea of unity. Yet yesterday or last night, he was on Twitter beating up on Beto O'Rourke, whose district was impacted by the recent shooting in El Paso, Texas. And so what Donald Trump says and what Donald Trump does or what he tweets is two different things. And I think people have come to grips with that. But I also think that if you support Donald Trump and his rhetoric, you are just as guilty and just as responsible for some of the things that are a result of the rhetoric that comes from Donald Trump.
Now, I'm a Hispanic guy from the South. You're a black guy from the South. Are you surprised at how willing some of the candidates on the Democratic side are willing to flat out label the president as a white nationalist? I don't think we've ever heard anything like this in the previous election. Are you surprised?
I'm not, because we're not living in previous times. We are in a moment that, again, I never thought I would imagine myself being in. The fact that you have keyboard thugs who do not mind sending me racial tweets just because they do not agree with me. You have a president who will say there were two sides in Charlottesville, or tell members of Congress who are U.S. citizens to go back where you come from in order to generate a response from a group of people. We had a candidate for president in Donald Trump who said Mexicans were rapists and thugs. So I'm not surprised by what he says, and I'm definitely not surprised at the fact that you have people who are willing to stand up and say what is right for the benefit of this idea called America. And if Republicans do not step up to the plate and call the president out and remind him about the danger of his words, they are just as guilty as he is. And the fact of the matter is, this will not stop until it has deep impact into one of them, and then everyone will come to grips about the danger in his rhetoric.
All right, now the other side of this discussion, of course, is guns. What are some of the proposals that are coming from the Democratic candidates on possible gun legislation?
Well, let's step aside from the Democratic candidates for a second and focus on what the House Democrats have done. You've seen two pieces of legislation that have been passed by the House in a bipartisan way, led by House Democrats, that has the approval of over 90% of the American people. That's Democrats and Republicans. Those bills now sit in the Senate led by Republicans and have not seen the light of day. And again, these are not partisan bills. These are bipartisan bills. These deal with closing the Charleston loophole, which could have prevented Dylan Roof, a white supremacist, from killing 9 people in a church in Charleston, including my dear friend and mentor, Senator Clemente Pinckney, and other legislation that would do extensive background checks, something that we've heard from Republicans that there's a need for, yet they will not press the action button. And what I'm so disappointed in when it comes to the Senate, when I look at the Charleston loophole bill, you have Senator Graham and Senator Tim Scott, 2 senators from South Carolina where the Charleston shooting happened, and yet they will not press the majority leader to even take up these bills to have a hearing and have a discussion. So I think before we move to what the presidential candidates are saying, I think we need to move to what the Congress can do right now. I think they can do that right now with swift action. I think what you've heard from most of the presidential candidates is a real comprehensive package in how we deal with gun reform, and you've heard from a few of them who say they were willing to do or take executive action to deal with this national epidemic called gun violence.
Antjuan Seawright joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much.
Thank you.